So in part two of Unit 5's video, we're going to be talking about how the Romans form a republic and how that republic is set up, including like what roles different, parts of the government played, including the idea of having checks and balances, which is an idea that we sort of use in ours today. We'll also talk about the establishment of a law code known as the 12 Tables, which will give us the idea of innocent until proven guilty. Also, the concept of a jury trial, which is pretty interesting. We'll talk about a lot of different things with the Roman Republic, so hope you enjoy the video.
All right, Unit 5, Part 2, we're going to talk about the Roman Republic and citizenship. If you look at your SOL, the student will demonstrate knowledge in ancient Rome, and it talks about the social structure, the role of slavery, the significance of citizenship, the development of democratic features in the government. We'll also talk about how the Roman military leads to the domination Mediterranean basin and Western Europe, although most of that comes in the next video. Okay, so let's talk about some of the early people who are there, and I'm going to show you a little bit of a video of how the early people adopted some of the ideas of the Etruscans. There are three main villages that sort of form early Rome. Those are the Umbrians, the Latins, and the Etruscans. And eventually those villages will become one city. By 620, the Etruscans, specifically one Etruscan family called the Tarquins, were controlling the city and started to provide it with its kings. So the Tarquins will provide the kings for early Rome. Now, it was this group or this family that created the Forum, which was the center of the city and the government. Everything in Roman life sort of spreads out from the Forum, which was at the center of the city, and it was something like I'm going to show you in the next graphic. Okay, so I have the Forum circled here with the red circle. It's the center point of the city.
Before Rome, there were the Etruscans. They taught the Romans everything, but left no written records.
Incredible. The Etruscans were some of the most amazing artisans that the West has ever seen. They worked in metal for sculpture. They worked in terracotta and life-size statues with these amazing, inviting expressions. Very warm. They're not cold and distant, but they're people that you want to meet.
The Etruscans lived in the fertile hills of Tuscany. But their real wealth lay underground, the richest deposits of iron ore, copper, and tin in the central Mediterranean. As early as 700 BC, they created shafts, tunnels, subterranean galleries, smelters, and slag heaps so vast that 2,500 years later, Mussolini reprocessed them to produce weapons for World War II. Etruscans traded their metalwork as far afield as Syria, Portugal, and even Sweden. But above all, the Etruscans were famous for their open displays of affection between men and women. It shocked the ancient world.
The Greeks, who knew the Etruscans from very early on, before Rome was anything, before Rome was, saw that the Etruscan people gave a position to women that the Greeks certainly wouldn't. Not only were women part of the entire house, women reclined at banquets with men, which for a Greek was absolutely unthinkable.
The Greeks, and later the Romans, loved to embroider scandalous stories about the decadence of the Etruscans. They were almost certainly untrue.
Okay, so what about the Tarquins? Let's get back to our pointer here. Okay, what happens is that a Tarquin ruler named Tarquin the Proud, his son will commit an atrocity against a Latin girl named Lucretia. He rapes her, and then he is accused of this crime, and he basically says that his son will not be charged because he is the king's son and he can do what he wants. And so Lucretia, I believe, commits suicide. Long story short is the Latins were not very happy with this, so they told Tarquin the Proud that he would be removed from power. They basically ran him out of town. And from then on, the Romans had a law, no more kings, and that's sort of foreshadowing for later on when we start talking about Julius.
Rome took everything from the Etruscans. Etruscan engineers showed them how to drain the marshes where Rome now stands and channel the water into underground sewers. Etruscan architects and builders laid out the Roman Forum as a public square in the 7th century BC. Though Romans owed everything to the Etruscans, they would one day turn on them, crush their beautiful cities, and defame their memory. It would be the first step on Rome's path to empire. Most of what we know about the birth of Rome comes from the work of one man, one of Rome's greatest historians, Livy. He lived in the reign of the Emperor Augustus, over 700 years after the city was founded. The glory of Rome was at its height, but Romans were already haunted by the specter of decline. The empire was emerging from decades of civil war. Bitterness and political intrigue were rampant. Decadence, greed, and profiteering were the order of the day. To men like Livy, raised on the Roman stoic virtues of valor, loyalty, and self-sacrifice, it seemed the spirit of Rome was rotting.
I feel that indulgence has brought us, through every form of sensual excess, to be morbidly attracted to death in all its forms. Rome is at the dark dawning of an age in which we can neither endure our vices nor face the remedies needed to cure them. Livy.
So what do they come up with? Well, there are two classes, basic classes in Rome that we want to talk about. One of those are Patricians, which are the founding fathers of Rome, and a small, they're made up from certain families. It's a small group of Latin nobles. You had to be from those select families to be a Patrician. They are going to establish a government that's called a republic, or representative democracy. You get representatives to run things and to do the day-to-day running of the government. Now, most of the people who lived in Rome were plebeians, and plebeians made up people of all different levels of wealth. There were rich plebeians, there were poor plebeians, and so they filled all the different areas of wealth in the Roman Empire. Now, a third of the population were actually slaves, and it was hard to tell a poor plebeian Roman citizen from a slave. The only real distinction was the slaves wore a rope necklace that had a metal tablet at the end that described like what their job was, who they might belong to. Slaves had no rights, obviously, but I did want to point out that slavery was not based on race in ancient Rome. Usually they were people who were sold into slavery or from conquered territories. Alright, so what were the rights and responsibilities of both patricians and plebeians? First off, I want you to realize that these only applied to males. Patrician males and plebeian males and women had very little rights. They were supposed to be under the authority of either their father or their husband if they were married, for females. But patrician males and plebeian males were expected to be called citizens and to do their civic duty. They were expected to vote. They had the right to pay taxes, obviously. They had to pay the right. That's funny. They had to pay taxes. They were both expected to serve in the military. But here's where things get different. The patricians could hold public office, but the plebeians could not hold public office. And so this is a pretty big distinction. Obviously, if plebeians could vote, but not for anyone that would represent them or from their group, that leaves things to be pretty unfair. Okay, so what I want you to do is in your notes, fill out this chart about who the patricians were, who the plebeians were, and then what their rights were. And then, in the box over here, I want you to give me some ideas about why you think the plebeians would not be happy with the current system and might go on strike against the patricians. Okay, and that's exactly what they did. They went on strike, and the plebeians eventually will gain more rights. They refused to work for anyone in the city. They refused to serve in the military. They even threatened to start their own city. And the patricians eventually give in. They recognize the tribunes, which are their elected representatives, and they say that they could not be arrested. And as a matter of fact, they're going to be protected by the law. It was against the law to even threaten a tribune at this point. Okay, so the plebeians do eventually get even more rights. The 12 Tables is a law code that the patricians and plebeians will work together in forming. The laws of Rome will be written down and put on 12 bronze tablets. Now we'll get a lot of our legal ideas from this document, including the idea of innocent till proven guilty. Also things like a right to a trial by a jury of your peers, and other concepts that will be there, including like testifying on your behalf and not having to testify on your behalf, items that we will pull from that. Also, debt would no longer mean you could be sold into slavery, which I think was pretty important for a plebeian. And then one area where they do lose a little ground is it becomes illegal for a patrician to marry a plebeian. Now later on this is going to change. Societies change, viewpoints change, and that happens here in this case as well. Okay, so now on your notes, what I would like for you to do is fill in about how the 12 Tables had an influence on our current legal system, and do that right here on your notes. Thanks. Okay, so what was the government like in this representative democracy that we call a republic? Now we should know because we are a republic as well. Okay, so first they elected a person at the top. These were the consuls, these guys up here. And a consul, okay, was elected to a one-year term, and they had veto power. So in other words, they could forbid the passing of other things that one consul had chosen. They had to agree to do this. Now, in times of crisis, they would bring in a person that was called a dictator. A dictator was only brought in a time of crisis. Okay, so now the main branch of the Roman Republic, and that was the Senate. It is the most powerful part of their government. It had 300 members who were in it for life. Once you got elected to the Senate, you were in for life. They made the laws, and they advised the consuls. Now, there was also an assembly, which was made up of all adult males. And if you look back at the chart that was on the previous screen, you'll see that both the Senate and the assembly had membership from both plebeian and patricians. Now, of course, that wasn't always the case. Okay, so now on your notes, what I would like for you to do is talk about some of the checks and balances the Roman Republic had built in to look out for each other, to make sure that a consul didn't become too powerful, or that senators didn't become too powerful, or tribunes didn't become too powerful. So what were those checks? Okay, so what were the big ideas for this video? The first one is that the social structure in the Roman Republic was broken into 3 distinct groups. There were patricians, who were the powerful nobility. They didn't have as many people as the other groups. You had to be from specific families. The plebeians, who were the majority of the population and represented all levels of wealth. Slaves, who were, of course, once again, was not based on race and made up about a third of the population. As a matter of fact, it was hard to tell a slave from a poor Roman citizen. And then another big idea is that the laws of Rome were codified as the 12 tables, and we got the idea of innocent until proven guilty from that. And then the last big idea for this video is that the Romans established a representative democracy which had many different checks and balances. Okay, make sure you're keeping up with your notes and you're doing your journals, and we'll see you next time.